Howdy folks. I'm gonna see if I can show you how I do the intermediate forging. Now I'm just getting started, so I'm gonna talk directly to you for a second, and then I'm gonna bring the camera in close where you can see what I've got here. So the intermediate forging is something where I forge a little bit, and then I grind a little bit, and I go back to forging a little bit. So it might take a little time because you're heating, you let it cool off, and then you're going to go back to the fire again. But it has an interesting effect. But you might be wondering how I do some of my spacers, and I call that technique again intermediate forging. So let me show you the pieces, and then after that we'll get right up close, and we'll be using a vise, and actually we'll be using a oxyacetylene torch, and then we'll be reforging a certain part. And I'm going to share that with you. I'm going to put this together in real time. I haven't had it all together just yet. I got all the pieces cut out, and I kind of want to explain, but I'll be doing that with my hands right here. You may not see my face, but that's okay. I want you to get a good look at what's going on right here. And I just have at this point, the anvil is nothing but a work table. So I'm not using the anvil for this. I could put this thing together on the workbench just as easy. I got these parts laid out, and I'm also going to insert some pictures of showing you how I forge these parts and how they come to be, just different stages. But let's get you up close where you can see what I got. Okay, I've got you up close now, and let's look at some of these parts. All right, so a spacer a lot of times is comprised of more than one piece. And in this case, I got a 3-piece spacer. The middle piece is bigger by a margin. It's about, I don't know, 3/32 seconds, maybe an 1/8 inch bigger than the other two. Let's just take the middle one out, the bigger one out, and we can stack these two together, and the alignment pins line up, and they're the same size, basically the same size. And like I said, the alignment pins go in and we'll lock them together. So they're big enough to go through the 3 pieces. They stick out a little bit too much on this. So let's just start putting it together. And I had them in a kind of an order, so I know, and I got them marked. And it's always good to mark your pieces that go together. They may stack, and you think, well, I can keep up with that. That's easy enough. But when you get in the heat of the moment, maybe not. You can get them backwards real quick. Okay, now I've got alignment pins in it. I'm kind of counting on you to be able to see those. They stick out just a little. I'm going to pin them down, and I'll take them back out, and whenever I come back to the fire, and even out the colors and stuff. I want to do that with fire and oxide, ferrous oxide. Okay, these 3 are together, the pins are in. Okay, now what? I've got a little piece of all thread, and the slot's slightly smaller than this piece of all thread, so I flattened a little bit on 2 sides, and we can put that through there. But let's just lay that aside for a minute. Put a nut on it. We get a full nut and washer. And it might look a little awkward because those pins are sticking out, but I'll go back and put all this together after I peen those, and they won't be in the way. They're sticking out just a little bit. So we'll see a gap between them. That's okay. Got a washer, a nut on each side, and we kind of shift that to the middle, and then with a couple of wrenches we tighten those nuts up. And what those washers do is they span out wide enough to hold the alignment pins in, to keep them from ever, because we're going to get this hot right here. But between the alignment pins and the tightness of this, we're going to be able to actually forge this outside middle spacer into a dome. So we're going to just simply grip it like this in the vise, and it's tight enough, and we're going to focus the heat in such a small area that the whole thing won't get hot enough to deform. It'll hold up with the surface area here and here on a good blacksmith vise. And probably a machinist vise would serve for this too. But we're going to go around that with a torch and a ball peen hammer, a small 1 pound ball peen hammer, and we're going to go around this and we're going to forge that over. And then you'll start to see the logic behind some of these parts and the sequence that takes place. But it's going to look like that, sort of, to start with. And once you get it like that and tighten down, it's in a pretty safe condition. And there's going to be some cautions that I'll bring up, and there's also going to be some other pointers that I'll give, and it's pretty neat, pretty cool. So we'll get all this situated and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, we're ready to get started shaping the center spacer. Now, I want to point out something. I've got a photo of all the pieces when it was just forged out of the bar, and they have arrows pointing to each segment of it. And just so you kind of understand, and I'll also insert a photo to the side showing you which respective parts are which. But if I remember right, the outside ones are the green, and the middle one, the bigger one, is the yellow arrow pointing at it. And then there's a bigger piece that will be the butt cap. That's this. I think it's a blue arrow, but we're going to add a picture that makes that real clear. But let's get started. I've got a pair of tongs that are ready to rotate this in the vise as I need to. I've got my ball peen ready and I got my torch ready. So we're going to turn the camera down right here on the vise, and you'll see how this thing sits in the vise. So pay particular attention to that, and I'll bring it out. I'll be talking too as I'm working. So let's get started. Okay, I've got it in the vise. I want you to take note of a couple things. Let me use something for a pointer. The outside spacers, which would be the green ones in the photo, are a little lower than the top of the vise, and that's to help protect. In other words, if I make a mislick, the top of the vise will tend to help protect that edge. And every now and then there might be a little mark, but it'll come off there pretty easy. And I'm gonna re-blacken those too. But I just don't want any big hammer marks or dents in it. So let's focus the heat right on that ridge, that center spacer. Now, it's the jaws or the vise are bearing right on that all thread and the nut on each side, and it's got a flat face that I've flushed them off and ground them flat. My torch is not really terribly hot. This is a brazing tip, by the way, so I kind of want to get it. This is mild steel, by the way, and I do this with stainless as well. And oddly enough, titanium, you can do it with titanium. So once that comes up to heat, I just focus on that ridge and stay off the other parts. And my hammer is going to be actually hammering through the flame. So I'm working on the hottest part, and I'm not hitting it hard. So you can see why the jaw of the vise will hold this. It just needs some resistance. So there will be a little coordination you have to kind of have. And once you get kind of in mind what your right hand and your left hand is doing, you see, did you hear that? I hit the vise jaw, but I did not hit the other piece. Now that may happen, and I may have to deal with it. I'm being real careful. I'll go all the way around this. More than once, just to be sure, and I'll look at it. I may have to cool it, or I may cool it, let it cool, and then look it over. But I want that to be a dome. Now, when it's all said and done, it's going to have the appearance of a proud ring around it. Put my torch down temporarily to move it. If a shape like that was done on a gun barrel, they would call that a wedding band. So there I'm just getting situated, getting it squared up a little bit. I'm not going to get too rough with the vise. Let's get back on it. Being real gentle with it, but at the same time, hard enough to get something done. One of those things you want to kind of want to have very few distractions and just take your time, take your time. So I'm going to cut the camera off and I'm going to go around it, and then we'll look at it again, and we'll assess what we got to do, and then we'll talk just in a minute, okay? So I see a little narrow spot right here and here, and I'm just going to concentrate there. Get it back up to color. I like working this at an orange heat. If the heat gets low, you'll hear it, the sound, and you'll feel it in the hammer how it's not soft anymore. It firms up and it sounds ringy like it would as a metal, steel. Real careful with the hammer. When I take this thing apart and just look at the individual parts, I can look at whether or not it's straight or not, or if there's any alignments or corrections that need to be made, I can make those with a grinder or a file, or lap it on sandpaper in a hard plate. So that pretty well evened that out in that section. You can even grind those hammer marks out and smooth it up and re-blacken. I've got this spacer cooled off. Now it's back in the jaws of the vise. These things are still hot, so I'm having to be careful because the torch warmed it up. This outside, or excuse me, the middle spacer has significantly widened and covered the outside spacers. So it kind of makes a dome. And so I've got room, when I pop them apart, I got room to do several things by way of cleaning up. I can take each individual part and reflatten. I don't have to reflatten the inside surfaces because I wouldn't want to do that because they are absolutely hot fit to each other. But I can flatten the outside of this spacer, which I can tell you it won't take much, because if there's any deformation, it's inward in the middle, and the outside's probably mostly untouched. And then there's the rim of the middle spacer, this rim right around here and on both sides. If there's any wobbles, and there is a little bit from forging, individual hammer blows makes a little bit of a scalloped edge. I may turn that on the flat platen or something and just flatten them out, even it out, so when it goes back together, the reveal around here is all the same. So we'll take it apart now and we'll look at it. Okay, let's see if we can take it apart. Now I've got one of the nuts on the other side in the jaws of the vise. This is kind of tricky because with all that pressure on it before, the all thread may have taken a slight bend, and this stuff happens. So we'll see what it looks like. Okay, yeah, there it is. So let me get this out of the way. And I usually throw away those old pieces. I don't really want to mess with straightening things up or anything. I keep a box of new nuts and washers, and I keep all thread. I can just cut off what lengths I need. This is subject to change knife to knife. It might not be the same thickness, so I can customize that piece. Okay, so again, I will flatten this surface and this surface, and I'm gonna pop it apart. Now there is a little something about popping this apart. Now, in that article I wrote for Blade Magazine, I forgot to mention that, and it caused one of my buddies some grief. But on that middle section, whenever I milled out the slot, I put a couple of extra divots, one on each side, away from the alignment pins. That way I can go in with a punch, and holding this in the vise, I can actually reach in there and punch that other washer out, flip it over, and do the same thing here. But I have access to it by cutting those little divots in there. So just on a slight angle with say a 1/8" punch, I can find that divot over there and just tap. And keep in mind, it may be difficult to get out. You gotta not get real rough with it, but it'll come out. These pieces are more or less hot fit to this, but they'll pop out of there and you can snap them back in. Okay, let's go take it apart and look at it. You can see that after I've flattened each one that there's a central area that's concave, but it's bearing all the way around. I drilled one of those out. It was being difficult. I punched the other one out. It came right out, no problem. I probably painted a little bit more than I thought. It may have deformed just a little bit in the forging of things, but now I'm going to see if I can get this thing apart. I'm not sure if I can. It will only go back together one way, so I'm not too terribly worried about how it goes back together. It's just almost impossible to get it wrong, because it just won't go back together if it's not right. So let's see. I got to be able to hold this in some way and use a punch. Now those divots are down inside there, and I'm actually tapping on the far spacer. That slipped off, missed it. Do this side here a little bit, see if that. Okay, so I've got the vise jaw opened up just enough to catch the rim of that forged central spacer. Yeah, I can see it's coming out a little bit, but not much. So I'm gonna have to get rough with it. I may have to hold it in the vise and use like a nail set. I've got a nail set. I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to do this on camera. And might as well do a little on each side. There we go, it came out. So you see the inside of that, how cupped that is. And let's look at the other one. Pick it up. All right, notice those divots. That's the center spacer. So when it goes back together, it can only go one way. It can only go that way. And I can easily tap that back into place. So I'll get the other one out and do a cleanup and put it all back together. I think you got the idea now.